Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, we are at the point of the off-season where the countdown to the start of fall camp is down to hours and not days. We can kind of do that in our heads at this point if we wanted to, but we're not going to do that because the answer will depend on when you listen to this. So it is down to hours and not days, rest assured. And so that also means it is time for us to hurry up and get through some more of the listener questions we asked for when it was still lots and lots of off-season. And then you guys gave us a trillion questions to get us through all of the off-season. And some of them are going to spill over into the actual camp time next week, but that's okay. We appreciate every single one of them.
Yeah, we'll get them all eventually taken care of as stuff also happens around the Ohio State football community. But yes, Tom, before anything does happen, we should probably get started.
Well, let's start with this one from @DonJohn1902. Thoughts on Ohio State having a chance to play football in the state of Indiana 4 times this season? We've already made one trip to Indianapolis this year. We could drive basically through or around Indianapolis 4 more times, depending on how we go to South Bend and all of that. It feels like a lot.
It feels like more than most people should have to deal with, unless you that is part of your truck driving route. You know, yes, I'm based in Ohio, but I have to go into Indiana, and then come back, We are not truck drivers. I don't think anybody here has a CDL that I know of. But it's, I don't mind the 2 trips or 3 trips, but when you're talking about 5, that's a large part of your fall, just driving back and forth on I-70. And that's not a good place it's not a fun place to drive. It's something we dread every year because it never ever changes. And then you got to plan your trips around the Indianapolis traffic as well, which is also kind of tedious, and also getting out of Columbus, that kind of traffic. It's just, I'm not saying Indiana shouldn't be part of the Big Ten. I love Indianapolis. I think that's where the Big Ten championship game should always be, and that's where the Big Ten Media Day should always be. But I'm saying I don't know that the Big Ten needs actual schools in that state.
It's not the most exciting trip in the world. I mean, Bloomington's fine, but there's not a ton of hotels in Bloomington, so we generally don't stay in Bloomington. So you're staying in suburban Indianapolis and just driving down the day of the game. And then Purdue is, West Lafayette is not the most exciting place in the Big Ten, and it's also not a big place. So generally you're staying in a different suburban Indianapolis hotel for that trip. Notre Dame, I'm looking forward to the Notre Dame trip. I've been there once, but that was 15 years ago. It was Charlie Weiss era, so it has been a hot minute since I've been in South Bend. But again, you're not staying in South Bend, so you're staying a little bit outside, or some people are staying in Michigan, I think. So I mean, it's you're not staying right on the campuses. So you don't get the fun fun taste of campus life or fun big city like we go to Minneapolis, and you're staying in Minneapolis, and you're in the big city or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's fine. I would rather, however, Tony, have 5 trips to Indiana than 5 trips to Nebraska or Minnesota or Rutgers, or another drive that is far, far further afield than Indianapolis. If we have to go to one state 5 times and it can't be Ohio, Indiana is not a bad choice.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that one. I do wonder, how early do we get to Notre Dame? How early will we get to the stadium that day? That's a 7:30 kick. What if I put the over/under at 1:35? Where are you going?
AM or PM?
Yeah, because it's a place we've never covered a game there. You've been there, I haven't, but it also feels like a place you should experience. That's what I tell people when they're coming into Ohio State for the first time. Get there early, just experience the campus, experience the goings on. So I know we don't always have time to experience things, but I'm hoping we do on that one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that trip. Like I said, I've been there, but it's been a while, and I was just I was there, and I was covering a game, but I wasn't covering a game for a team that that I was following on the beat or anything like that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. I do think we'll get there early. We'll see what kind of events are going on that day. we end up working very, very late. A 7 o'clock or 7:30 game at night generally translates into us leaving the stadium about 2 or 3 in the morning. So we will probably not get there incredibly early. But if that was I generally plan on those games being a 12-hour-ish day from the time we get there, or at least the time I leave home until the time I return home, or on road trips. In the case of road trips, a hotel. That one might be a 14 or 15-hour day, just because get more time in, get more content in. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of interest in that game that day. So, and if there's other great games that day, sometimes we just want to watch football. So, yeah, I would say earlier than 1:30 a.m. or sorry, p.m. not a.m. 1:30 p.m. That day would be my guess. Next one from @SeanDark007. He asked us to come up with our own personal top 25s. That seemed a little ambitious, but more broadly, how we see the season playing out in the playoffs. So we wanted to talk about our playoff teams. And Tony, if I say Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, over under 2.5, I'm guessing you're going to take the over on that, right? In terms of if I take those 4 playoff teams, the odds that I have more than half of the playoff field correct feels like that's pretty likely, right?
I think most people would take the over. I am on the LSU bandwagon this year and off of the Alabama bandwagon. So I think, but even then, it could still be over without Alabama in that picture. I am also on the Penn State over Michigan bandwagon in Happy Valley. But as we know, you can lose a game in the Big Ten and still make the playoffs. But can 2 teams lose games in the Big Ten and make the playoffs? I'm going to go under, Tom. I'm going to go under. I think Clemson might be somebody to watch playing in the ACC. I also think USC has the best player in the country. They do not have the best defense. USC has to go to Notre Dame. They have to go to Oregon. What they also must do is don't lose the games you're supposed to win. And they can't do that. So I do think Caleb Williams is capable of getting them there. I think he's going to, it's kind of like he's going to drive them across the nation. But there's going to be somebody, perhaps the defensive coordinator, who accidentally put the parking brake on and nobody realized it.
The Grinch Who Stole Playoff. This would be the sequel to last year's version of much the same. Now, when you say USC has the best player in the country, do we need to stop recording and do an instant reaction show about Marvin Harrison Jr. transferring to USC? Because I knew there were rumors earlier, but I didn't actually hear that had happened. I'm not sure I would agree with it if that wasn't true. I do think if you're giving me 4, those are probably, of those 4, the most likely. If you're going to give me a few more choices, I think, I would add LSU out of the SEC. I still think I think last year was a down year for Alabama, and they still just barely lost to LSU. They still just barely lost to Tennessee. So I think I will believe Nick Saban is done and going to lose to Brian Kelly back-to-back years when I see it, and not a moment before that. I think USC is a good choice. I think there's a possibility that a 12-1 Pac-12 champion USC makes it. They don't necessarily need to run the table. I think you've got your choice of Clemson or Florida State. They're in the same division. So whichever one of them gets out of that division and wins, assuming they win the ACC, I think a 12-1 ACC champion, either one of those would make it. I know people are talking about Texas. Texas is kind of, I will believe it when I see it with Texas, because every year it's going to be Texas, and then it never is. So maybe. But between the 3 SEC teams we mentioned, the 2 Big Ten teams we mentioned, Penn State as well, the 2 ACC teams, USC, it feels like that's probably the ones that I think have a really decent chance. The interesting thing, though, is if you have Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State in their round robin, everyone wins all their games other than those, and they each go 1-1 in those, then you're getting into Big Ten championship tiebreakers, and whoever wins that tiebreaker to go to the Big Ten championship game has the leg up, obviously. But then the question is, okay, who is the second one? And I know I think whoever loses the Ohio State-Penn State game might have the advantage because that one happens before the Michigan-Penn State game, right? Because the Michigan-Penn State game is like 2 weeks from the end of the season. So especially if Ohio State loses that, Ohio State would also, in this scenario, if they're 11-1, they would have lost to Penn State but beaten Michigan. So you got a big win right at the end of the season. You've also got to win over Notre Dame. You've also got to go win over Wisconsin. I think at that point you're probably. So that would mean that. Hang on, I'm doing the math in my head. So that would mean that Michigan is probably. Well, I don't know. I don't know the Big Ten tiebreakers well enough at this point, but it feels like that's at that point. If Ohio State loses to Penn State but beats Michigan, Ohio State's probably in, and then it's whoever else among those two.
Well, does Michigan have the non-conference schedule to withstand a loss to either Ohio State or Penn State? Because Ohio State has the benefit last year of beating Notre Dame, and Michigan this year will have the benefit, no such benefit in the non-conference that will boost them up. So I think there's a chance. Now, it always depends on who else is ranked, in the top 6 or whatever. But I don't think it's a sure thing if they lose to Ohio State that they're in at 11-1, because there are going to be other programs that will have some say, and Michigan's schedule, they haven't helped themselves in this situation. Like if it comes down to an argument situation with a one loss, because they don't have anything to boost them up.
Well, and Georgia's kind of a similar conversation because Georgia is going to be playing Tennessee and Florida, and we'll see what Florida is. Tennessee, everyone's sort of assuming is going to be top 10, maybe. But if they lose, if they're 11-1 and Tennessee goes to the SEC championship game, then Georgia's probably out. And if Georgia, even at 12-0, and Georgia goes to the SEC championship game, if they lose to Alabama or LSU or whoever it is in this case, you're kind of having the same conversation as you are with Michigan, where, okay, Michigan has, in this scenario, a win over, say, Penn State and not much else. Well, Georgia has a win over, I guess, Tennessee in this scenario and not much else. So if they don't win the SEC, I think they may have an issue. I think you have a possibility you have an SEC West champion or an SEC West champion who wins the SEC at 12-1, loses a game in the regular season at some point. They're probably getting in over an 12-1 Georgia who doesn't win the SEC. So a lot of this comes down to how many other conference champions have one loss versus two losses. Because if you have a one-loss ACC champion, a one-loss Pac-12 champion, a one-loss Big Ten champion, and a one-loss SEC champion, those are probably your 4 teams, unless there's someone who wins the Big 12 with one loss, and in which case, I don't know. I just based on history, I assume the Pac-12 gets left out again.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if they can say no to a one-loss Georgia and how they would go about doing that, or how they would manufacture Georgia's way in, because we know that they're a top 4 team. They're back-to-back national champs. How do you keep them out? So that's my question. How do you keep them out? And we'll see.
And does the committee want to get some fresh blood in there? Honestly, for the health of the sport, it would not be bad if you had some other teams in there other than just sort of the standard issue teams. Having Cincinnati in a couple of years ago was not a bad thing. Having Michigan in a couple of years ago was not a bad thing. Having TCU in last year was not a bad thing. You're already, with the consolidation of conferences and some of the conference, trend moves that you've seen in recent weeks, it already feels like the sport is kind of consolidating more and narrowing where the big boys play football even more than it has already over the past decade. I don't think that's great for the health of the sport overall. I don't expect that to be something the committee's really taking into account, but if they do, I suppose it could work against the 2 SEC, 2 Big Ten teams. That would be, even if it is truly the top 4 teams in the sport, and there's no one else who's even close. I don't think that's great for college football. If it's 2 Big Ten, 2 SEC teams, it's supposed to be a national sport, and the size of the nation that would be interested in that particular field of 4 is not particularly big. All right, so let's do another one. That is from, if I pull up the right tab on my computer, from @Vango_0. What are the 10 worst officiating calls that you have witnessed in an OSU game? I don't think I can come up with 10. He provides the Clemson overturn of the catch strip and defensive touchdown, the Jordan Fuller scoop and score that got overturned, the the national championship game missed pass interference, defensive hold, and catch on the potential Chris Gamble third down conversion. That's the play that could have probably ended the game in regulation with Ohio State winning 17-14. And then the 2007 Illinois non-fumble call ruled down by contact. Do you have others that jump to mind? I mean, I'm sure everyone right now is screaming about the Marvin Harrison targeting that got overturned in the Peach Bowl. Do you have others that sort of immediately jump to mind?
Those are the four because I'm not a Penn State fan, so I don't actually have an actual list of top 10 ref calls or grievances. But these are the things those are the ones that you wouldn't have to jot down for them to come to my mind. That Illinois one is just horrendous because it was clear as day that it was a fumble, and I'm still not sure how that was allowed to happen. The great Jim Davidson had so many photos from the 2002 Miami game of Dustin Fox being held and Chris Gamble obviously being held, so many calls that were never made. So you could probably come up with 10, and I think people have actually come up with you, Tom, are one of those.
Yes, not just people on this podcast. After that game and the Miami people on the sort of early days message boards were just super angry and all up in their feelings about how the refs took that game away from Miami. I wrote a column that was 22 or 23 calls that were very obvious play calls that were, not just oh, this guy got held somewhere in the interior of the line on a pass that went. So it was, significant, obvious jersey stretching outside the shoulders kind of holding at the point of attack on plays that would have given Ohio State a first down or, really, really obvious bad missed calls or calls that went against Ohio State that maybe shouldn't have. The Chris Gamble catch was maybe the single biggest one where he got held, very obviously got held. The holding would have given them a first down. He also caught the ball in bounds. That was ruled incomplete. That would have been a first down. Either way, Ohio State would have been able to. That was with maybe a minute and a half left, minute 45, something like that in the game. Miami was running low on timeouts or maybe out of timeouts, so Ohio State could have essentially run the clock down to almost nothing, and Miami would have had 13 seconds left to try and go 87 yards or whatever it was, down 3 at the end of the game. So those two missed calls that he mentioned in the question, those are there. I do think of all of the Penn State gripes, and there are, there's a lot of them that are kind of, okay. I mean, you're not going to get every single call every single game, so, and not all of them swung individual games. There was one in the 2003 game where there was a pass. This might have been when Scott McMullen was in after Craig Frenzel got hurt, but I think it was Ben Hartsock, and the ball bounced, and he was a good foot off the ground diving for the ball, and it bounced, and then he sort of scooped it up, and it was, looking on TV, it was wow, that was a really, really obvious, even watching live, it was that ball hit the ground, and they ruled it a completion, and this was pre-instant replay. That's, if you're going to tell us we're being homers, we're picking up a bunch of pro-Ohio State calls that would have benefited Ohio State for this. This is one that would have benefited Penn State if the call had been made correctly. And that one is the one that, if the Big Ten was involved in a multi-decade massive anti-Penn State conspiracy, Tony, that call is a lot like what it would have looked like.
Do you remember the one, and I'm not sure if Joe Pa was still there, but there's a replay, and the Penn State replay of equipment wasn't working, so the call had to stand. And it was clearly... It was I believe it was Ohio State and Penn State, and the call went. It should have been overturned in favor of Penn State, but because the equipment wasn't working, it's just call stands. And so again, if there was a conspiracy, the equipment would somehow stop working at inopportune times. It's like a heist movie when they flick a switch and now the camera goes off or something like that, or they hold a still of the room up against the camera and it looks like nothing is happening. That's what they did. They held a still of the play up against the replay camera, and it's It's not working. It's frozen. And boom, play stands.
Jim Delaney Stuxnet worm invading the Penn State equipment or Penn State instant replay room. Yeah, one of the biggest conspiracies in Big Ten college football history, maybe United States history, maybe world history. Yeah, that's that was a good one as well. Yeah, there's and I'm sure everyone right now, anyone from Michigan who's listening is going, what about we know. And the answer to the spot in 2016 was, no one knows. It was very close. He was right on the line. He was either going to get called first down or not, and there was no replay video that was going to overturn it. And I remember not long after that, there was someone who was an aerospace engineer or something who was on MGO blog and a Michigan fan and did all sorts of data manipulation. And, his based on his calculations, he made it by 2 inches. But, that was one where Michigan fans calling the replay officials cowards for not overturning it. And it's like, there has to be clear evidence. I don't think anyone on either side can honestly say there was clear evidence on that one. So either he made it or he didn't. If AJ Alexander's butt wasn't there, he would have made it easily, but he did. It was a very close call, and that was not clearly the right call. That was not clearly the wrong call. That was as call stands as calls get, because there was nothing. And, Harbaugh going like this, like, no, he was not. There is no way he was a foot short. So no, put your hands down.
They don't call it the Illuminati for nothing. Okay. There's reason for that. I will say the Clemson overturn of that fumble, that's your 3.5 steps with the football in your hand, and you're taking a 4th step and they call it incomplete. I still don't understand that. The targeting, of course, against Georgia. I think credit to you for the Miami thing, because people don't remember. This is January of 2003. This is Tom watching the television on the VCR, taking pictures with his camera of his television screen, taking that film to CVS to have it developed, and then scanning those pictures and then uploading it to his computer and then putting JPEGs into stories. Is that correct, Tom?
I don't think I had any JPEGs. I think I just watched the game. It was on a VCR. Everything after that was probably not accurate, but I did watch it on a VCR and provided down, distance, time, yardage, all that kind of stuff, and said, if you can come up with a similar number of plays that went, for Ohio State that were obviously incorrect calls that had direct impacts on drives, ending drives, prolonging drives, by all means, let me know. And no one took up the offer on that. So I assume, as always, Tony, I was right. Next one from @Carino_JR. Do you feel the 1968 class, which would be, I assume, the super softs he's talking about there, could match up with other classes at Ohio State? I think my early answer is no, because those guys are like 70 years old now. I don't think they'd hold up very well in the modern game at all. As far as the class on the whole, in terms of, the best classes, this is almost impossible to say, because this is 30 years before even the basic 900 number kind of recruiting coverage, Buckeye Sports Bulletin recruiting coverage. So there's nothing in terms of, putting them in a historical context other than just their on-field performance. And their on-field performance was undefeated in 1968 as sophomores, 1 loss to Michigan in 1969 as juniors, and 1 loss to Stanford in 1970 as seniors. Now, the out-of-conference schedules they were playing this was not an incredible out-of-conference schedule by and large. They played some okay teams. They played Purdue, who was number 1 in 1968. That was obviously a big deal. 2-1 against Michigan when Michigan was a top 5 team every single year. That's obviously a big deal. Just in terms of resume, yeah, I think I think you can stack that 3-year span up with just about anyone. And if you take, if they had somehow beaten Jim Plunkett and Stanford in 1970, in the 1971 Rose Bowl, then you're winning 2 actual national championships. I know Ohio State claims the one, but you lost your bowl game, so that's why it's not the AP national championships. It's the National Football Foundation or whatever it is. That is a team that was fairly close. They had a terrible second half against Michigan in 1969 and a bad Rose Bowl against Stanford in 1970. that's a team that very well could have gone, a class that very well could have gone undefeated over the span of 3 years. And, but they didn't. So I think they're in the conversation in terms of best classes ever, but I don't think they're necessarily the best class ever.
Yeah, and again, I don't know how you necessarily measure it, I guess, with wins, like you said. But in terms of, because I was also looking at it, like, I believe there are players from back then who could play today. Overall, however, it's a completely different game. Like, for instance, the heaviest player in that class as a junior was 237 pounds, and that was your left tackle. So if you want to put that class up against like today's classes and have them all be 19 years old, today's classes are going to demolish them just because the size of the game. So like I was just like looking at who all was on this team, like the defensive ends on I think the 69 team, Tom, 6'2", 206, 6'1", 209, 6 foot 197, 5'11", 182, 5'11", 192, 6'2", 211, 6'2", 208, 6'4", 226 could play today. 6'1", 188, 6 foot 185, 6'4", 195. A lanky guy. You have to put some weight on him. But different game, and yeah, that class, the 67 class, if you will go down in history for forever and for very good reason. It might be the greatest class because we still talk about it. What other class do we talk about like that? I think you could talk about the 2017 class, but what do they have? I think you could talk about the 2021 class, depending on how things go this year. I think that's the one that you might want to watch out for.
Yeah, and I think the other part of this thought experiment is, okay, you give the 1967 freshmen access to modern training and nutrition and that kind of stuff, and all of a sudden they're not all of a sudden they're winning every game 63-0. So, I think that the one thing you could definitely say, one guy who would not translate to the modern game, Jack Tatum, who would play about 3 snaps and then get thrown out, and then play 3 snaps and then get thrown out, and then play 3 snaps and then get thrown out. But man, you would not want to go over the middle for the first 3 snaps of the game against that Ohio State defense. So, yeah, I think that's a group that it's always so hard to do these cross-generational things because, if you're just going to time warp these guys into the present, obviously they don't hold up. How would they hold up? What would they look like? How would they have played with modern training and nutrition and all that stuff? Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Probably. I mean, they probably would be very good players. They were guys who were the best in the nation at that point, so they probably would be the best in the nation at this point. But they would be a lot better. If you took those guys and carbon copied them and gave them modern nutrition, obviously, they're also winning all of those games 63-0.
I think Jack Tatum's NIL money would have just gone to bailing himself out of jail for all of these hits.
Yeah, that he would have gotten, there are some guys on that team that would have gotten some real NIL money. Can you imagine Archie Griffin, the NIL money that Archie Griffin would have earned in the modern day? Man, and how many shows we would be doing, Nikki Sualua style love letters to Pete Johnson. If Pete Johnson was playing in the modern era, that would have been fantastic. That was a little later than the 68 class, but yeah, a lot of those 1970s guys would have done pretty well in the modern NIL era. Next one from @LobsterDonut, which is two great tastes that taste great together. Which Big Ten coach seems like they lost the most on crypto? And my follow up on that, Tony, is what do you think it did to his house hunting options in Champaign?
See, this doesn't necessarily negate Brett Bielema from not being crypto, but I see him as a guy who extorts his buddies with like incriminating texts and photos. Like whenever he needs like some money, he's like, hey, you don't want this leaking out there, do you? Like, remember this night in Kokomo. But yeah, there's some crypto there. I do think PJ Fleck is certainly a crypto guy. Wouldn't be, before I met Matt Rule, I would have maybe put him up there as well, but he seems normal. He seems like, just a run of the mill, happy to be in the Midwest, even though he's from New York, kind of like you, Tom, but still don't trust him.
World-class good guy. Exactly. Tony, I think your suggestion also is great. Row the blockchain. I think that is a great answer. I'm a little annoyed that I didn't think about him, but yeah, I think that's a good one as well.
I got some more time. I got some other thoughts on this. I'm sorry. I know you're trying to wrap up the show. Tom Allen definitely puts his money in gold.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Harbaugh, absolutely a stamp collector. And here's the one time. Kirk Ferentz didn't even know he lost money on crypto until he finds out that Brian had been investing his parents' nest egg. And so that's when they found out that everything they had saved, Brian lost in the crypto.
With the way Kirk Ferentz manages his football team and his offense, there is no way Kirk Ferentz has ever invested money anywhere other than inside his own mattress. There is no chance. He has never, he doesn't trust it. Listen, Tony, the FDIC, it's only been around for like 90 years. Can we trust it? I don't know. Will they make good on their, I don't know. It's too risky, Tony. That's why it's the old Box Spring savings and loan for old Kirk.
The only FDIC he trusts is Folgers dough in can.
There you go. I was like, none of those letters are the first letter of punt, so I'm not sure where he's going with this. But there you go. That Folgers dough in can is, yeah, no notes. 10 out of 10. Speaking of 10 out of 10, let's talk about the marriage of the final question today. The name of the question asker and the question from at Big and Chunky 50. Tony, Taco Bell or Arby's?
I don't mind Arby's, but it's a hassle to get it based on where the Arby's are around me. But also, when there are Arby's around me and Taco Bell around me, it's always going to be Taco Bell. Like 99 times out of 99 and a half times, it's going to be Taco Bell. I never think about Arby's. I'm never I don't even know what I want to grab for lunch or whatever. You know, I'm out. Arby's is literally never on my mind unless I'm right next to it. And even then, I only see it half the time. I have Arby's blindness. I don't even see them sometimes. I'll drive by them and didn't even know they were there. It's Taco Bell. And again, I'll tell everybody, customize on the app. You've wanted to work at Taco Bell just so you can make whatever you want. That's like why you've wanted to work there. You can do that on the app. You don't even have to work there. Working there is just a bonus. You can make whatever you want on the app.
Now, Arby's is a bigger part of my life than it sounds like it is yours. I am no Kevin Harris, but I will stop at Arby's from time to time, mostly because that is located directly between the softball fields where I spend about 6 months of the year and my home. So if I am driving home after a softball game and kids are in the back and saying, we're hungry, then that's an easy place to stop. The gyro there is not bad. It is not. You don't feel like if I eat a big roast beef sandwich from Arby's and a bunch of curly fries, I feel like I am going to sweat out basically the salt content of the Dead Sea. So I don't generally go with that. But one of their gyros, a traditional Greek gyro there, is not bad. But yeah, I'm with you. Just, not that I feel any better after I eat Taco Bell, but I will choose Taco Bell over Arby's if those are a choice. We had a longtime travel companion on these road trips at a previous stop, who confessed that he was a Taco Bell aficionado as well, and it was one of the more shocking things we had ever heard. But yeah, that was a fantastic. Taco Bell was, you have a bunch of people with very different dietary ideas and very different, dietary restrictions and all that kind of stuff. Taco Bell was always one of the places that everyone in the car could be happy. Everyone would be fine with stopping at Taco Bell, and so yeah, that's. I don't eat it nearly as much as I used to, but when I pass Taco Bell and it's like, oh, we could do that. That's especially on a road trip. That is always a good choice. You'll never hear me complain about Taco Bell until the point when everyone complains about Taco Bell.
Yes. Well said, Tom. Could have been left unsaid. Anyway, want to thank you all for joining us. As always, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. The camp is right around the corner. In fact, it's not even around the corner. It's on the same side of the street that we are. It's right there. You can see it looking straight ahead. Starts on Thursday morning. We will be there at practice, checking it out. Wednesday, we will talk to Ryan Day and the quarterbacks. So we'll have more coming from all of that. So now is a great time to join us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. You can also find us here at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle and Facebook.com/BuckeyeHuddle. If you're listening on a podcast platform of whatever, you go ahead and leave us a 5-star rating review. We would appreciate that. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, thumbs up. And if you're watching on Facebook or listening on Facebook, you do stars or something like that. I haven't quite figured it out, but if you're doing something, feel free to do something there. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.